Plenty of football to get into, including the head coach clearing a little bit up on why Nick Foles has been missing. We've got plenty from Doug Peterson, who did speak today. We'll have that coming up with John McMullen in just a moment here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, as he joins us for a look at the Eagles and the NFL. A lot of NFL stuff happening as preseason continues, or I should say really opens up Monday night. You had the Hall of Fame game last week, but Thursday night. Every team will play on Thursday as we get ready for the 2018 Philadelphia Eagles. Johnny Mack is in the house, day 11 of Eagles training camp at the NovaCare Complex. What's up, pal?
How are you, Mike?
I am doing well and ready for Thursday night just to see a little live action, I guess, as the Eagles will take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. But in doing so, Doug Peterson kind of hinted today that we won't see Nick Foles in that game. He said he had a little upper body issue, as we kind of hinted at yesterday, but this is the first time really that Peterson insinuated that there is something bothering him and that he most likely sounds like he will not play on Thursday.
No, he's not going to play. Doug wouldn't fully commit to that, but he hasn't practiced. This was the third straight practice he missed. Obviously, with the game on Thursday, they're not going to have a full practice tomorrow, so there's no way he's going to play. And yeah, Doug went all Dave Hackstall on us and he keeps doing that this summer, upper body, lower body. But Nick actually clarified it when he spoke today, and he's dealing with some kind of muscle issue. Looked like as he was pointing at the podium to his trap, he called it neck and back, but he's having some muscle spasms there. Said it's not serious at all, and the Eagles are just being smart about it, and they should, because there's no need that he certainly doesn't need to play in that game, and you'll get to see a lot of Nate Sudfeld, a lot of Joe Callahan for the South Jersey fans and Holy Spirit High School fans.
Yeah, that's right, and he said, it was funny. He joked a little bit today. What can you tell us about the game? Well, we play the Steelers. Kickoffs at, I believe, 7 o'clock. We're going to try to play everybody. But, we talked a lot about this training camp. There's not a whole heck of a lot of open competitions, but you get 4 games to really prove yourself in these games. And the Eagles obviously have, I would assume, would you say every starting spot other than maybe what's going on at nickel is locked up?
Well, I would say nickel corner's the obvious one, and also weak side linebacker.
Just for 1 week
is a legitimate competition.
Just for 1 week.
Well, no, Nigel. Obviously, there's 2-3 down linebackers, but there's that third that's going to play in the base defense. So the third position is up for grabs. But again, that's percentage-wise, you're talking about a player that's going to play 25 to 30% of the snaps as opposed to 60 plus for the nickelback. So depending on how you look at who's the starter, I agree with you. Traditional depth charts say the weak side linebacker is the starter. Percentages say the nickelback is the starter in today's NFL. But both of those positions are legitimate competitions.
I thought it was an interesting question that one of the reporters asked. I think it was Jimmy Kempski, who said, you got a chance to see the team first 2 weeks of camp last year. Is this team better than the one last year? Would Doug Peterson go out on a limb and say that what he sees from this team is better than his Super Bowl champions?
No, he didn't bite. I think why Jimmy went that way, because if you go back to last year, you remember Doug made the comparison of his Green Bay Super Bowl team, and he said this team was more talented, that team from last year. We all kind of chuckled at him, to be honest, at that time. But he knew how good that team was before most people. I think there's too many question marks as far as injuries, and the biggest one is obviously Carson Wentz. I think if he's healthy and playing at the same type of level that he played last season, this team has a very good chance to be better than last year, because they've added some veteran talent that can still play. People like Michael Bennett, Haloti Ngata on defense, Mike Wallace on offense. There's a chance they could be better.
I think a lot of people have that same thought process, but we know the chase is a lot different than being chased, and that's what this Eagles team is up against. And, I'm interested. You've been around the team for the last couple of seasons now. Does this team have a different feel and mentality around it?
No, I mean, I talk about it all the time. There is a human nature aspect of winning a Super Bowl that makes it difficult to go back to back. I think this team is uniquely put together to perhaps beat that for the major reason that so many of the key players were injured last year and didn't get to play in the big game. Starts with Wentz, but also Jason Peters, Darren Sproles, Jordan Hicks. I mean, those are big-time players who are starters on this team. And while they were a big part of building the Eagles up to becoming a Super Bowl champion, they still have a hunger to actually do it on the biggest stage. So I think that helps them. But it's way too early to speculate if they can overcome some of the natural pitfalls there always are for Super Bowl champions.
Yeah, we're talking with John McMullen at JF McMullen. I'm going to go back to Foles real quick because Doug was asked about whether or not this injury was related to the elbow injury that Foles had last year, just to clear the air for the people out there. This has nothing to do with that injury, correct?
No, completely different. And as I said, Nick flat out said what it was, and he's dealing with some kind of muscle spasm issue in his traps, in his neck, his back, his upper back. So nothing to do with the elbow. And they're just being cautious. Nick didn't fully say, he didn't say I could play if it were a regular season game, but he kind of intimated he would play if it was a regular season game.
Well, there was a lot of people, John, that were concerned last year because, he had not played in any preseason games. And but it kind of shows you that the Eagles can be extra cautious with these guys because there is some history that suggests both Wentz and Foles have made it fine without performing in preseason games.
Yeah, I mean, I asked Carson last week when he talked if he felt the need to play in a preseason game. He said no. He got asked that question again today. He said no again. He'll probably get it asked again next week, and he'll say no again. I mean, it's just, look, it can be very important for young, proven players, both Carson and Nick are. It's if they were completely healthy, would you like them to get a little work so there's not as much rust when the season starts? Of course, but it's not necessary. It's not completely necessary, and everybody's on the same page there. The organization, the head coach, the player himself. It's not the perfect situation, but the Eagles have done it before, and they can do it again.
Hey, John, I want to bring up a couple guys who almost now we I don't want to say take for granted, but we don't ask a lot about them because they have been successful, one of which was a big – at this time last year we were talking about a lot, and that's Nelson Aguilar, and just, what kind of player you're seeing there. At this time, he was the talk of Eagles training camp last year.
Yeah, I mean, it was so interesting. I mean, if you go back to last year, we talked almost every day, you and I. You remember how a lot of us reporters were saying how good Nelson looked in the spring, and everybody was killing us and saying it doesn't matter. And to their credit, it doesn't matter. He had to prove it in the regular season. But he turned the corner, and he did. And he became a very impactful player to the point where, yeah, he's a given now. He was given a Veterans Day off today at practice. That's how much of
wow.
The Eagles think of him now. That's only reserved for the, players who are very, very key cogs of this team. Zach Ertz, for instance, and Jason Peters, and people of that ilk. Nelson's in that category now. I mean, he was one of the best slot receivers in football last year, and the Eagles expect him to be even better this year. And he's had a tremendous camp again. I think most of the issues with Nelson were, to be honest, mental. And the second part is he's probably not an outside receiver in this league. And once Jordan Matthews was traded and cleared the way for him to get into the slot, I think everything clicked for him.
John, also another guy, Fletcher Cox, he's been a mainstay on this team, but at what time we always start to look at those guys who get up in age. Now, he's not on the wrong side of 30 just yet, but are we looking at more very productive years from Fletcher Cox?
Yeah, he's one of the best players in football. Other than Aaron Donald, who's holding out again with the Rams, and maybe J.J. Watt if he's healthy. When you talk about interior linemen, and J.J. in the 3-4 a 5 technique would be considered interior. He's the best in football.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the only two names you can look at and say they're better than Fletcher Cox. And if you were to, this is the Super Bowl champions, and if you were to rate this roster from 1 to 90 on who are just the best football players, Fletcher would be number one. He is the best football player on the Philadelphia Eagles.
And that's good to hear, because I saw your notes from 97.3 ESPN.com today saying that he exploded from the interior to make a play at practice today. It's good to hear that, he still has that explosion and is still on that level, because he could have an even better year if he's still the same player, which you're indicating that he is, because Brandon Graham, Michael Bennett, they got better guys around him now.
Yeah, they do. They've only, this was one of the 2 or 3 best defensive lines in football last year, and it only got better because you bring in Bennett, you bring in Nada, who's obviously aging, but still a very good 2-down player in this league. And then you expect Derek Barnett to get better as a second-year player. They're loaded on the defensive line, and he's the best of the best unit maybe on the team. So yeah, he's sort of a no-brainer. The Eagles don't worry about it. We talk about floors and ceilings for players. His ceiling, he's talked about it. He wants to be NFL Defensive Player of the Year. But when you talk about his floor as a player, it's the Pro Bowl. He's going to the Pro Bowl. He's a Pro Bowl player. And that's something nice you can rely on.
I know one thing that you've been harping on this offseason and you asked Doug today about is what it's going to be like not having Frank Reich and John DeFilippo around.
Yeah, I've said all the time, and not many people talk about it because everyone's focused on personnel, but I think that's the biggest issue that this team has to overcome. It's the biggest question mark. They were 2 very, very good assistant coaches. You don't have to look very far. You can stay in this town and see the success Andy Reid had. And when things started to kind of fall apart, a lot of it had to do with losing so many good assistant coaches that went on to become head coaches elsewhere in important cogs in other cities. That's already started for the Super Bowl winning team. Frank is obviously the head coach in Indianapolis. John's the offensive coordinator in Minnesota, and I think with a good year, he'll probably be a head coach next year somewhere in this league. It's tough to replace guys like that. And I don't think, I'm going to be honest here, I don't think Mike Rose is as good a coach as Frank Reich. I don't think Press Taylor is as good a coach as John DeFilippo. And I think that might be the biggest issue the Eagles face this season.
Well, if you can elaborate on how that impacts the team on the field in terms of, this is a team that won the Super Bowl. They've obviously got talented players, and many of them are the same, and some of them are being upgraded from last year. How would taking a step back at those positions show on the field?
Well, I think people dismiss Frank Reich's role on this team because Doug calls the plays, and typically when you're an offensive coordinator that doesn't call plays, people don't think you're very important. But he, for the most part, put together the game plans. And as Doug said today when I asked him the question, he's in his ear. And he was often the voice of reason. We talk about Doug's aggressiveness, his willingness to go for it, constantly push forward, which was a very important part of this team's success. Sometimes he wants to go too much, and Frank was the voice of reason. Those are Doug's words. So I'm not sure he's going to have that comfort level, at least at the beginning, with Mike Rowe. And then you talk about John DeFilippo works. He was the guy who worked on a day-to-day basis with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. And he was the guy, after Nick Foles struggled and mightily at the end of the regular season, that scratched everything and went to Nick Foles and said, Nick, what are you comfortable doing? And that was the start of the Eagles revamping their entire offense to those RPOs. It all started with John DeFilippo. Those two guys were a big part of that team, of that coaching staff, and they both had 100% confidence from Doug Peterson. Look, when you lose guys like that, it's just natural. There's going to be some erosion.
Yeah, no, that was a good insight there. Talking with John McMullen at JF McMullen. And another thing that Peterson brought up today is he expects his starters to play, it looks like, about 65 to 70 plays throughout the preseason, which means you're going to get about a game's worth of them spread out over 4 weeks and really 3 weeks.
Yeah, and that was something that I was surprised that Doug gave up, but he said, 65 to 70% for the healthy starters. Understand if anybody's tweaked, if there's any issue, they're not going to play them. That's where Nick Foles is. But for the guys who are healthy, he wants to get them to that range, and that's typical, I think. And most of that, if you think about the third preseason game, playing about a half, because that's the game they still want to sort of replicate a regular season week. That's what most teams do in their preparation leading up to that game. So you'll probably see a series or two in the opener, maybe a little bit more in game 2, and then you play to the half in game 3.
All right, John. Also, the fact of the matter is this Eagles team is going to have the bullseye on them here. A lot of teams are going to be gunning for them. And one thing is for sure, this team, for the first time, has this time last year, you could vouch for this, the expectations were very mixed. Is that fair? The expectations are...
I would even call them low.
Right. So this team was riding into a season with a ton of pressure and a ton of expectations. It'll definitely be a different feel, and look for this team, something they've never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, it is. We talked about it a lot with the underdog narrative, and now it's completely changed. They can no longer use that, and Doug has sort of embraced the target on the back narrative now, and they even have T-shirts indicating that they are the target, they are the champs, and everybody's coming for them. And I think, when Jeffrey Lurie talked before the Lincoln Financial Field practice after the extensions to Doug and Howie, he mentioned it, and I've talked about it a lot in the offseason, just how good the NFC is. You can make cases for so many teams on the NFC side that if everything goes correctly, they could be Super Bowl teams. So you look at the competition, and it's really not the NFC East. I mean, the Eagles are clearly the best team in the NFC East, but you go to Minnesota, you go to Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, all the good teams in the South. Atlanta, you'll see on September 6th. Carolina's still a good team. New Orleans, a lot of people have them as Super Bowl favorites. A lot of people have the Rams as Super Bowl favorites. A lot of people think the 49ers are going to be really good with Jimmy Garoppolo. You don't even talk about Seattle anymore, but they still have Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll. A lot of good teams on the NFC side.
Sure is. I want to ask you a question totally off of the Eagles here and what we've been talking about. Of course, the Eagles, you can check them out here Thursday night on 97.3 ESPN. I've been reading, we talked a lot about, there was a day about a month ago, we talked a lot about the XFL and the, what's the other league called?
The Alliance of American Football.
There you go. The Alliance of American Football. Well, apparently the ratings for the CFL games have been going up and up with Johnny Manziel. And it made me think about if that gives any of these leagues, some sort of hope that, like, if they can, with the product being very in flux right now with these new helmet rules and the way that game was called the other night, like if somebody saw, people are watching Johnny Manziel, people are watching players that are that have a name. Is there a small thought of opening that, hey, if the NFL product goes down because of this helmet rule and stuff, and there is some players out there that we can try to get before the NFL? I was talking about this earlier today, like, I wonder if there's a window for a league to kind of say, we can, I don't want to say compete, but maybe that they would think they can compete.
Well, I think I know where you're going, and I think there is an opportunity for a league to say, and I talk about it all the time, this is what I think the NFL should do, is stipulate that this is a dangerous game and no longer sort of cower to the public relations aspect, to the very vocal minority, and sort of constantly change the rules that we always talk about that have made this game less entertaining. They're all based on safety measures.
Yep.
So I think there is an opening, and a lot of people have speculated man would do this and say this is going to be old school football. This is like it's going to be football before they made all these changes, and maybe that could fuel popularity of a secondary league. Now, while I say that, the AAF has already said the same things in regards to safety, and so is the XFL. And neither league has started playing. So there's no league willing to go down that road, and it's all because of legal its liabilities. So until someone can get together with the players and agree and saying, look, the entertainment value of our game is eroding because people are concerned with the safety aspect of a dangerous game. I've said from day one, you can't make a violent game safe. And that's what football is. So all you're doing is watering it down.
Yeah.
But you need both sides to agree. The league has to agree. The players have to agree. And at that point, it's your decision as an adult to say whether you want to play or not. But you have to acknowledge the risk, and you have to waive that legal liability down the road and make sure you're not going to go after the league, because that's the way things are, the way they are.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting to see that Manziel was a draw, that the CFL games are up, and that if, back in the day, the USFL, they went out and got Herschel Walker. They went out and got Jim Kelly and Steve Young. They went out and got the best college players and tried to compete. Now, when, evidently, I mean, obviously that didn't work out long term, but maybe somebody that's currently in office had something to do with the demise of that league. However, if there was a window for somebody else to say, look, we're not going to have the same restrictions and we're going to go out and get players that that would be the big key.
Yeah, I think that's also difficult because back then the financial landscape was a lot different, and the USFL often paid players more than the NFL did. That's not possible now with this being a $14 billion industry. You can't compete with the salaries, so you're not going to see high-level players defect to another league. That's one issue. And the Manziel popularity, I mean, that was an interesting situation. I mean, obviously we know his history off the field, how popular he was before his life went off the rails. I mean, that's a short shelf life for the popularity there. And if he throws 4 interceptions again, nobody's turning on the CFL to watch Johnny Manziel.
Come on.
It's sort of, everyone wants to see it once, and then they saw it. And I think things will settle down to normal.
Very XFL-ish.
Issue for the NFL. Yeah, I think the bigger issue for the NFL is the fact that the Hall of Fame game ratings were down, I think, 13%. And we talk about it. Now, compared to the rest of the television landscape, the NFL is still wildly popular. But the reality is their ratings keep going down year after year after year. This is the 3rd year now. We just started, but we're down 13% in one game. And it all has to do with the fact that the product is not as entertaining as it once was. And it shouldn't be, because if anything, the athletes are even better. It's not lesser players. It's the game is less exciting to watch.
Yeah, a lot of that conversation, and of course we'll see what it looks like once the regular season gets here with these new roles. But the first taste of it, not so good. He's John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter, and of course 97.3 ESPN.com. All the Eagles training camp coverage is right there. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.